Hey guys, today we're going to be doing another lesson that again is still all review of stuff that you've already done. We're essentially just going to be like adding and subtracting different rational numbers. So fractions, decimals, and mixed numbers. So let's get into it. Okay, so this is lesson 1.3, adding and subtracting. When adding or subtracting, your answer should be in the same form as whatever the question was. So what I mean by that is if you are asked to subtract two fractions, your answer has to be a fraction. It can't be a decimal. If you were subtracting or adding two mixed numbers, your answer has to be a mixed number, not an improper fraction and not a decimal. So just keep that in mind. Also, if you do have a fraction, whether that's a normal fraction or an improper fraction, or if you have a mixed number, the fractions always have to be in lowest terms. If you don't simplify or put your fraction in lowest terms, you won't get full marks. And then if you do have like a fraction and a mixed number that you're subtracting, you get to pick which one of those you answer in. It is a good idea though to convert both numbers into the same form of number before adding or subtracting. Okay, so let's start with just dealing with decimals or integers. We're going to go over how to do like long subtraction and then also how to use a number line. And if you like using algebra tiles or something like that, you can also use that, though that isn't as easy when we're dealing with decimals. Okay, so for the first example here, we're going to go over how to subtract negative 4.7, take away negative 3.2. Now, the important thing to know here is anytime you have two minus signs right beside each other like this, that are either directly beside each other or just separated by a bracket, those two turn into a plus sign. So what this is really saying is negative 4.7 plus 3.2. And then you could do that using a number line, and I'll show you how to do that. But you could also set it up like negative 4.7 plus 3.2, like so. And then you just do negative 0.7 plus 0.2 gives us negative 0.5. So we've essentially just ignored the numbers in front of the decimal place. We've just done these numbers back here. So negative 0.7 plus 0.2 is negative 0.5. And then we do our whole numbers. Negative 0.4 plus 3 is negative 1. And so our answer is negative 1.5. For the second example, negative 3.2 minus 7.1. Now this time I only have one minus sign in the middle, so I don't get to change this to a plus. So this will actually be subtraction. So we can set it up as negative 3.2 minus 7.1. And then the same thing, we do negative 0.2 minus 0.1 is negative 0.3. And then negative 3 minus 7 is negative 10. Okay, so we always come back to the signs that are in front every time we're adding and subtracting, and then we always put our sign right there. Okay, I'll show you what this could look like on a number line. Now, if you don't want to have to draw out a number line, the easiest thing to use would just be a ruler. Now, I don't have a ruler here, so I'm going to have to use my dad's measuring tape, but that's fine. So let's go over how we could use this. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to pick where 10 centimeters is, and I'm going to call that 0 on my number line. And then between 10 and 20, those are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then on the other side, I am going to have to relabel these so that I'm counting down as I move away from 0. So -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, you get it. So all I would do is I would say, okay, so -4.7, I'm doing this example right here. So -4.7, I find my -4, and then because -4.7 is closer to -5 than -3, I'm going to be counting down this way, and I'll go down 7 points. So I'm just counting the millimeter marks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So right about there. And if I wanted to write on my dad's whatever this thing's called, measuring tape, that would be even better, but I'm not going to because he wouldn't like that. And then all I'm going to do, because I'm adding, that means I'm getting more positive, so I'm going to move 3.2 spots this way. So I'm going to move the 0.2 spots first. So I'm going to go from this tick here, and I'm going to go 0.2 spots this way. So 1, 2. That brings me to this big long tick right here, halfway between these two terms. And then I'm going to do my whole number after that. So 1, 2, 3. And I would end up right here, which is the big tick between -1 and -2. And if I just count my millimeters again, this is -1, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. So -1.5. Okay, so you can use a ruler or just set up your own number line. You will need to have like tenths written between those though for this to work. That's why a ruler that already has those little ticks laid out for you is nice, but whichever way works better for you. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is adding and subtracting fractions. Now, the most important thing to remember when adding and subtracting fractions is that you have to have a common denominator. And we get a common denominator by multiplying both the numerator and the denominator, so the top and bottom of the fraction, by the same number. And you might have to do that in just one fraction, or you might have to do it in both fractions. Once you have your common denominator, then you're just going to either add or subtract the numerators to get your new numerator, and then your denominator stays the same. And then again, don't forget, if possible, put it in lowest terms or simplest form. Okay, so let's look at example 3. 4/3 minus 1/6. So in this case, I need to start by getting my common denominator. So all I have to do is multiply 3 times 2 in order to get to 6, which means I also need to multiply the top by 2. That is then going to leave me, sorry, let me just change my focus a little bit here. There we go. 4 times 2 is 8, 3 times 2 is 6, and then I don't have to change my other fraction. From here, all I do is subtract across the top. So 8 minus 1 is 7, and then keep the denominator. So our final answer is 7/6. That cannot be put into lower terms. 7 and 6 are not divisible by the same number, other than 1. And because we started in fraction form, we keep it in fraction form. So that would be our final answer. Okay, the last type that we're going to look at is how to add and subtract mixed numbers. And there's actually two different ways to do this. Option one involves converting the mixed numbers into fractions and then adding or subtracting the same way that we just learned how. The second option I will go over as well. It involves keeping them in mixed number form. However, it really only works great for addition and then some simple subtraction problems, but it doesn't work great for all subtraction problems. So because of that, I'm going to recommend using option one for at least subtracting mixed numbers, but I'll show you both of them. Okay, so we'll call this next one example 4. So we have 4½ plus 3 2/3. So the easiest way to do this is convert them both into fractions. And just a reminder of how to do that, we multiply the denominator by the base and then add the numerator. So we have 2 times 4 is 8 plus 9, and then we keep whatever the denominator was. So in this case, 8/2. And then on the other side, we'll have 3 times 3 is 9, plus 2 is 11, and then keep the denominator of 3. Now again, when we are adding fractions, we need a common denominator. So in order to get a common denominator here, I have to multiply the first fraction by 3 and the second fraction by 2. That gives me 27/6 plus 22/6. And then we just add across the top. So that gives us 49 and keep our denominator. And then because we were given this question as mixed numbers, we have to turn our final answer back into a mixed number. So we'll say, how many times can 6 go into 49? And the answer is 8 times, because 8 times 6 is 48. And then how much is left over? Well, there's just 1 left over between 48 and 49. And then we keep our denominator of 6. So our final answer there would be 8 1/6. Now the other option, which I'll show you, is to do the same problem, but not convert it into a fraction. Instead, we can keep them as mixed numbers, just add the whole numbers and then add the fractions and then simplify. So for example 5, I'll go through how to do that. So again, we're going to start with 4½ plus 3 2/3. This time we're going to take our whole numbers and add them together. So 4 plus 3. And then we're also going to take our fractions and add those together. So plus 1/2 plus 2/3. 4 plus 3 is 7. And then in order to add our fractions, once again, you need to get a common denominator. So times the first fraction by 3 times the second fraction by 2. That gives us 3/6 plus 4/6. And then 3 plus 4 is 7, and keep the denominator. Turn this fraction back into a mixed number. So 6 goes into 7 once. There is 1 left over, since 6 times 1 is 6. And keep our denominator. And then lastly, add our two big numbers together again, which gives us 8 and 1/6. So either way, you get 8 and 1/6 as your final answer. Now I will also show you how to use this method if we're subtracting, but like I said, it doesn't work out quite as smoothly. So I wouldn't recommend it, but if you want to give it a shot, don't try it on a quiz for the first time, but if you want to give it a shot in your homework and see if you like it, you can. With that being said, if you just want to end the lesson right here and not worry about this and just always subtract in fractions, you can do that too. Okay, so for this one, I have 3 1/3 minus 1 3/4. So once again, I'm going to start by taking my whole numbers and subtracting them. So that'll be 3 minus 1, which is 2. And then also taking my fractions and subtracting them. So 1/3 minus 3/4. Again, to subtract fractions, we need a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply the first fraction by 4 and the second fraction by 3, which gives me 4/12 minus 9/12. 4 minus 9 is -5, and we keep our denominator. And this is where it gets tricky, because I can't have 2 and -5/12, because I can't have a positive whole number and a negative fraction. So what I have to do is I have to take this 2 and split it into 2 ones. I'm then going to take one of these ones and add it to this -5/12. So 1 plus -5/12. Of course, I can write any whole number over 1 so that it's also a fraction. And then to get a common denominator, I times it by 12. That leaves me with 12 over 12 plus -5 over 12. And then if we just go across the top, 12 plus -5 is 7 over 12. So my final answer is this one that I left over there and 7/12. Okay, more complicated because you have to split this number and steal one of them and leave one of them. So that's why I don't recommend this for subtraction. But again, if you want to give it a shot, go for it. Subtracting is much easier if you just turn your numbers into fractions and then subtract, get your common denominator, subtract right across the top, just like we did over here. Okay, that's all for today's lesson.